Before we begin, I want you to ask yourself one question. What would you do if the person closest to you suddenly became a stranger? Because what happened next will leave you speechless.
The orders came down on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a stone-faced major who wouldn't meet my eyes. 24 hours to assemble a team, 48 hours to wheels up. Antarctica. Communications equipment installation. Complete radio silence once we were on the ground. I'd been expecting something like this for months. The kind of assignment that comes with too many classified stamps and not enough explanations. The major handed me a manila folder thick with personnel files and deployment schedules, then left without the usual small talk about weather or weekend plans. Communications equipment, I muttered, flipping through the paperwork. Right. Because the Army needed a full colonel and 24 soldiers to install radio towers at the bottom of the world. The personnel list was interesting. They'd given me some of my best people. Thompson, who'd been watching my back for 15 years, and Connell, who could handle himself in any situation. But mixed in were specialists I'd never worked with, guys whose files had more black ink than actual information. The kind of soldiers who got pulled for jobs that didn't officially exist. I spent the rest of that day making calls, pulling strings, and cutting through red tape. By 1800 hours, I had my team assembled in Briefing Room C at Fort Bragg. 24 men, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Gentlemen," I said, standing at the front of the room with my hands clasped behind my back. "We're going to Antarctica." A few groans, some muttered complaints about the cold. Thompson raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He knew better than to question orders in front of the others. "Our mission is to establish a communications network in a remote sector. We'll be completely isolated, no contact with the outside world once we're operational. The weather window is narrow, so we move fast and we move smart." Private First Class Walsh raised his hand. Kid couldn't be more than 22, still had that eager look that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. "Sir, how long are we talking about?" "Classified," I said, which was the truth. The orders didn't specify a return date, just mentioned mission completion in that vague way that meant someone else would decide when we came home. Connell leaned back in his chair, those green eyes of his taking in everything. "What kind of communications equipment, sir?" "The kind that works in sub-zero temperatures and doesn't ask questions," I replied. A few chuckles from the group. "Gear manifest is in your packets. Study it tonight. We leave at 0600 Thursday." The briefing lasted another hour, covering cold weather protocols, equipment checks, and the usual warnings about hypothermia and frostbite. Standard stuff, except for the part about radio silence. That was unusual, even for a classified mission. After I dismissed the team, Thompson lingered behind. He waited until the room cleared, then walked up to my desk. "Jim," he said, dropping the formal address now that we were alone. "What's really going on here?" I looked at my oldest friend, this guy who'd pulled me out of more bad situations than I could count. His brown eyes showed the same concern I'd been feeling since the major walked into my office. "I wish I knew, Bob. Orders came from way up the chain, above my pay grade. Communications equipment in Antarctica." He shook his head. "Since when do we need a full platoon to install radios?" "Since someone decided we do." I gathered up the files, stuffing them back into the folder. "Look, I don't like it either, but we've got our orders." Thompson nodded, but I could see he wasn't satisfied. Neither was I. But that's how it worked in the Army. You got your orders, you followed them, and you asked questions later if you were lucky enough to survive whatever they'd sent you to do. The next 2 days passed in a blur of equipment checks, medical clearances, and the endless paperwork that came with any deployment. The gear list was extensive: cold weather clothing, survival equipment, and enough communications hardware to outfit a small base. But there were items on the manifest that didn't make sense for a simple radio installation: ground-penetrating radar, excavation tools, thermal imaging equipment. I cornered the supply sergeant about it, but he just shrugged. "Orders came down from division, sir. I just pack what they tell me to pack. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, with that October bite that promised winter wasn't far behind. The team assembled on the tarmac at 0430, looking like a collection of walking sleeping bags in their cold weather gear. The transport was a C-130, the kind of workhorse that could land on ice and take off again if the pilot was good enough. "Listen up," I called out as we loaded our equipment. "Once we're airborne, we're committed. No phone calls home, no emails, no contact with anyone outside this mission. Questions?" Specialist Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, what about emergency contact? Family notifications?" "Handled through command channels only." It was a standard answer that didn't really answer anything. Your families know you're deployed. That's all they need to know. The flight to Antarctica took 18 hours with refueling stops in Chile and New Zealand. Most of the guys slept, but I spent the time reviewing the mission files again, looking for details I might have missed. The communications equipment specifications were legitimate, high-frequency radios designed for polar conditions. But the secondary equipment list kept nagging at me. Why did we need ground-penetrating radar to install radio towers? We landed at McMurdo Station just long enough to refuel and pick up additional cold weather gear. The base commander, a Navy captain with 20 years of ice time under his belt, pulled me aside while the crew worked on the plane. "You sure about this location, Colonel?" He showed me our destination on a satellite map. "That's pretty far from anything. No research stations, no established supply routes." "Orders are orders, Captain." He nodded, but his expression said he'd seen enough classified missions to know when something didn't add up. "Well, you've got good weather for the next 72 hours. After that, there's a storm system moving in that'll keep you grounded for at least a week." The final leg of our journey took us over endless white expanse, broken only by the occasional mountain peak or crevasse field. The pilot, a warrant officer with more ice time than anyone had a right to survive, brought us down on a flat section of ice sheet that looked exactly like every other flat section we'd passed over. "This is it, sir," he called back from the cockpit. "GPS coordinates match your orders." I looked out the small window at absolutely nothing. No landmarks, no structures, just white ice stretching to the horizon in every direction. The wind was already picking up, blowing snow across the landing zone in sheets that reduced visibility to maybe 50 meters. "All right, people," I called out as the engines wound down. "Welcome to Antarctica. Let's get our gear off this bird and set up base camp before that weather hits." The next few hours were controlled chaos. 24 soldiers working in sub-zero temperatures to establish a temporary base in the middle of nowhere. We set up the command tent first, then the sleeping quarters, then the equipment storage. Everything had to be anchored against the wind, which seemed determined to blow our entire operation back to civilization. By the time we had camp established, the transport was already gone, disappearing into the gray sky like it had never existed. The sound of the engines faded, leaving us with nothing but wind and the crunch of snow under our boots. "Cozy," Thompson said, looking around at our new home. The command tent flapped in the wind despite being staked down with ice screws and guy lines. "Remind me to write a thank you note to whoever picked this vacation spot." I checked my watch. 1400 hours local time, though local time didn't mean much when you had 24 hours of daylight. "Let's get the communications equipment set up. Sooner we complete this mission, sooner we go home." The work was routine, but exhausting in the cold. We installed the radio equipment according to specifications, ran antenna cables, and established a basic communications network. Everything worked exactly as advertised. By the end of the third day, we had a fully functional radio station capable of reaching anywhere in the world, which made it even stranger when the new orders came through. I was in the command tent, running a final systems check on the radio equipment, when the encrypted message arrived. The printer chattered to life, spitting out a single page of text that changed everything. The message was brief and to the point. Our real mission had nothing to do with communications equipment. 3 weeks ago, a research satellite had detected an anomalous structure buried beneath the ice sheet at our exact coordinates. ground-penetrating radar had confirmed the presence of something large and artificial approximately 30 meters below the surface. Our job was to dig it up. I read the message 3 times, then walked outside into the perpetual daylight. The wind had died down, leaving the landscape eerily quiet. Somewhere beneath my feet, buried under 30 meters of ice, was something that didn't belong there. I gathered the team in the command tent an hour later. 24 faces looked back at me, ranging from curious to concerned to downright suspicious. These were good soldiers, and good soldiers could smell bullshit from a mile away. "Gentlemen," I began, holding up the printed orders, "there's been a change in mission parameters." Thompson's expression didn't change, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly. Connell leaned forward, those green eyes of his fixed on the paper in my hands. "The communications equipment was cover," I continued. "Our real objective is archaeological in nature. There's a structure buried beneath this location, and we've been tasked with excavating and investigating it." The silence that followed was broken by Corporal Hayes clearing his throat. "Sir, what kind of structure?" "Unknown. Satellite imagery suggests it's artificial, but beyond that, we're going in blind." "How long has it been down there?" This from Walsh, who looked like he was trying to process the idea of finding buried buildings in Antarctica. "Also unknown. Could be recent, could be ancient. That's what we're here to find out." Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, are we talking about some kind of research station? Maybe something the Russians left behind?" "Could be," I said, though the classified briefing materials suggested something much older. "We'll know more once we start digging." I spent the next hour going over the new mission parameters, equipment assignments, and safety protocols. The thermal imaging gear would help us locate the structure's exact position. The excavation tools would get us down to it. The ground-penetrating radar would map its layout before we went inside. When I dismissed the team, Thompson stayed behind again. This time, Connell lingered as well, pretending to organize his gear while obviously listening to our conversation. "Jim," Thompson said quietly, "this doesn't feel right. Since when does the Army send a full platoon to dig up old buildings?" "Since someone decided whatever's down there is important enough to classify," I replied. "Look, I don't like being lied to any more than you do, but we're here now, and we've got a job to do." Connell looked up from his equipment check. "Sir, if I may, this could be a significant discovery. Archaeological finds in Antarctica are extremely rare. We might be looking at something that could rewrite history." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. Connell had always been enthusiastic about his assignments, but this was different. He sounded almost excited about the prospect of digging up whatever was buried beneath us. "Maybe," I said, "but our job isn't to rewrite history. It's to follow orders and document what we find." That night I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the wind and thinking about the mission. The official story about communications equipment had been a complete fabrication. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to get us here under false pretenses, which meant whatever was buried beneath the ice was important enough to lie about. I thought about the equipment manifest, all those items that hadn't made sense for a radio installation. Someone had planned this mission very carefully, right down to making sure we had everything we'd need for an excavation, which meant they'd known about the structure long before they'd told us. The question was, what else weren't they telling us? The thermal imaging equipment picked up the anomaly on our second sweep of the grid. I was crouched next to Hayes, watching the screen as he adjusted the sensitivity settings. The display showed the usual blue-white of solid ice, but there, 30 meters down, a dark rectangular outline that definitely wasn't natural. "Got something, sir," Hayes said, tapping the screen with his gloved finger. "Structure's bigger than the satellite data suggested. Way bigger." I leaned closer. The thermal signature stretched across the entire display, and Hayes was only showing a section of it. "How big are we talking?" "At least 200 meters on this side. Could be more." He switched to a wider view, and the structure kept going. "Sir, this thing's massive. like football stadium massive. Thompson
If you made it till this, comment "I'm here" below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories.
stretched across the entire display, and Hayes was only showing a section of it. How big are we talking? At least 200 meters on this side. Could be more. He switched to a wider view, and the structure kept going. Sir, this thing's massive, like football stadium massive. Thompson appeared at my shoulder, breathing hard from the cold. What did you find? I pointed at the screen. Our target. Start marking excavation points. We'll need to dig down in a grid pattern to find the best entry point. The next 6 hours were pure grunt work. 24 soldiers with shovels, ice picks, and portable heaters, carving through 30 meters of packed ice. The wind had died down to almost nothing, which was the only reason we could work at all. Rodriguez and Walsh took turns operating the small excavator we'd brought, breaking up the larger chunks while the rest of us cleared debris. By 1400 hours, we'd opened up a section about 10 meters square. The ice got darker as we went deeper, like it was older down there. Ancient. When Walsh's shovel finally hit something solid that wasn't ice, the metallic clang echoed up from the hole. Contact, he called up. Definitely artificial. I rappelled down into the excavation site. The surface Walsh had uncovered was smooth, dark metal that didn't look like anything I'd seen before. Not steel, not aluminum. It had this weird quality where it seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. When I ran my gloved hand across it, the metal was warm to the touch despite being buried under 30 meters of ice. Keep digging, I called up. Find an edge or an opening. It took another 2 hours to expose enough of the structure to see what we were dealing with. The metal surface sloped downward at a precise angle, too precise to be natural. As we cleared more ice, the shape became obvious. We were standing on top of a pyramid. Jesus Christ, Thompson muttered when he saw the full outline. How old is this thing? The entrance was on the north face, about 15 meters down from where we'd started digging. It wasn't a door exactly, more like a rectangular opening cut into the metal surface. No hinges, no handles, just a dark gap that led into the structure. When I shined my flashlight into it, the beam seemed to get swallowed up after about 10 meters. Connell, Rodriguez, Walsh, you're with me for initial reconnaissance, I said. Everyone else, secure the perimeter and keep digging. I want this entire entrance cleared by 1800 hours. The four of us descended into the pyramid. The opening led to a corridor that was perfectly straight and about 3 meters wide. The walls were the same dark metal as the exterior, covered with symbols carved deep into the surface. The symbols weren't like anything I'd ever seen. Not Egyptian hieroglyphs, not Chinese characters, not even close to any alphabet I knew. They were geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Our footsteps echoed in the corridor, but the sound was wrong somehow. Too sharp, like the metal was designed to amplify noise. The air inside was dry and warm, which made no sense. After 30 meters of ice, this place should have been freezing. Sir, Walsh said, running his hand along the wall. These symbols, they're not just carved. Look. I examined the wall where he was pointing. The symbols weren't just cut into the metal. They were inlaid with some kind of different material that caught our flashlight beams and reflected them back in strange colors. Blues and greens that seemed to pulse. The corridor opened into a larger chamber after about 50 meters. Our lights revealed a space that had to be at least 30 meters across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above us. More symbols covered every surface, arranged in complex patterns that hurt to look at for too long. No dust, Rodriguez observed. No decay, no corrosion. This place looks like it was built yesterday. He was right. Everything was pristine, like the pyramid had been sealed in a vacuum. The metal surfaces showed no signs of age or wear. Even the symbols looked freshly carved. We found the first artifacts in alcoves along the chamber walls. Small objects made of the same dark metal, shaped like nothing I could identify. Some were geometric, perfect spheres and cubes and more complex shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves. Others were more organic looking, like tools designed for hands that weren't quite human. Document everything, I told the team. Photos, measurements, exact locations. Don't move anything until we know what we're dealing with. Connell was examining one of the larger artifacts, a cylindrical object about the size of a coffee can. Sir, this is incredible. The craftsmanship is beyond anything I've seen. Look at these joints. They're seamless, like it was grown instead of manufactured. We spent 3 hours in that first chamber, cataloging 47 different artifacts and taking detailed photos of the symbol patterns. Every surface told a story we couldn't read, in a language that might not even be human. When we finally returned to the surface, the rest of the team had cleared the entire entrance area. The pyramid's north face was fully exposed, revealing the structure's true scale. It had to be at least 60 meters tall, maybe more. The entrance we'd found was just one of several openings visible along the exposed wall. That night, I sat in the command tent writing my report to headquarters. The encrypted transmission took 20 minutes to send, and the response came back within an hour. 3 words. Continue investigating. Report daily. I established the exploration routine the next morning. Teams of 4 would enter the pyramid in 8-hour shifts, with strict check-in protocols every 2 hours. No one went in alone, and everyone carried emergency beacons. We'd map the structure systematically, chamber by chamber, documenting everything we found. Thompson pulled me aside after the briefing. Jim, what do you think we're really dealing with here? I looked back at the pyramid entrance, that dark opening that seemed to watch us. I don't know, Robert, but whatever built this place, they weren't from around here. Over the next week, we discovered that the pyramid extended much deeper than our initial scans had revealed. The structure had at least 6 levels below the entrance chamber, connected by corridors that branched and twisted in patterns that defied easy mapping. Each level contained dozens of chambers filled with artifacts and symbols, all in the same pristine condition as the first room we'd explored. The deeper we went, the more complex the symbol patterns became. What had started as simple geometric shapes evolved into intricate designs that seemed to tell stories or convey information in ways we couldn't understand. Hayes, who had some background in linguistics, spent hours trying to find patterns or repetitions that might indicate a written language, but came up empty. It's like they're not symbols at all, he told me after his 3rd day of analysis. More like instructions, or maybe warnings. The artifacts got stranger too. We found chambers filled with objects that looked like machinery, but with no obvious power source or moving parts. Other rooms contained what might have been artwork, sculptures, and reliefs that depicted scenes we couldn't interpret, showing figures that were almost human, but not quite right. Rodriguez discovered the most unsettling find on day 6. In a chamber 3 levels down, he found a room filled with what looked like sleeping alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove was sized for a human body, but the proportions were slightly off. Too long in some places, too narrow in others. Sir, he said when he showed me the room, I think this place was designed for people, just not people like us. The first signs were subtle. Rodriguez would pause mid-sentence during briefings, staring at the wall like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Hayes started checking his watch obsessively, even though time didn't mean much down here in the endless, artificial light. Walsh developed this habit of looking over his shoulder every few steps, like someone was following him. I chalked it up to stress. We'd been underground for 3 weeks now, living in artificial light, breathing recycled air, sleeping in shifts. The isolation was getting to everyone. Hell, it was getting to me too. I'd catch myself staring at those shifting symbols on the walls, wondering if they were actually moving or if my eyes were just playing tricks. Sir, you need to see this. Thompson's voice cut through my thoughts. I followed him deeper into the pyramid, past chambers we'd mapped and cataloged, down corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls here were different, the symbols more complex, layered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Here," Thompson said, stopping in front of what looked like a dead end. Except it wasn't. The wall curved inward, forming a perfect circle about 4 meters across, and covering every centimeter of that circle was the most intricate arrangement of symbols I'd ever seen. They weren't just carved into the metal. They seemed to float just above the surface, shifting and rearranging themselves as I watched. "It's a door," Rodriguez said from behind me. His voice had that distant quality it had been taking on lately. "Has to be. Look at the patterns." He was right. The symbols formed concentric rings that could rotate independently. Some kind of combination lock, but instead of numbers, it used these alien hieroglyphs that seemed to change meaning depending on how you looked at them. "How long have you known about this?" I asked Thompson. "Found it yesterday during the deep survey. Wanted to study it before reporting." He ran his hand along the edge where the circular door met the wall. "There's no visible mechanism, no handles, no obvious way to open it. I assigned Hayes and Walsh to document every symbol, every pattern." Rodriguez and 2 others started comparing the door's markings to artifacts we'd found in other chambers. Thompson coordinated the effort while I tried to make sense of what we were looking at. Days blended together. The teams worked in shifts, photographing, sketching, measuring. Hayes developed a numbering system for the symbols, over 300 distinct markings arranged in 7 rotating rings. Rodriguez found matches between door symbols and artifact patterns, suggesting some kind of instruction manual scattered throughout the pyramid. But progress was slow. Every time we thought we'd identified a pattern, the symbols would shift slightly, like they were responding to our attention. Hayes swore the outer ring had rotated a full degree overnight, but our measurements showed no change. "Maybe it's not meant to be opened," Walsh suggested during one of our evening briefings. He'd been getting quieter each day, speaking only when directly addressed. "Everything's meant to be opened," Connell said. He'd been spending more time down here than anyone, volunteering for extra shifts, studying the door with an intensity that was starting to worry me. We just haven't figured out how yet. The breakthrough came on day 12 of door analysis. Rodriguez discovered that symbols on certain artifacts glowed faintly when arranged in specific combinations. Not visible light. You had to use the thermal imaging to see it. When we applied the same technique to the door, 3 symbols in the innermost ring showed heat signatures. "It's responding to something," Hayes said, adjusting the thermal scanner. "Temperature's up 0.3 degrees on these 3 symbols." We tried everything. Touching the heated symbols, pressing them in sequence, rotating the rings to align them. Nothing worked. The door remained sealed, its secrets locked behind patterns we couldn't decode. That's when Walsh disappeared. I'd assigned him to the outer perimeter patrol, a routine sweep of the chambers we'd already mapped and cleared. Standard 2-hour rotation with check-ins every 30 minutes. At 14:30 hours, Walsh reported all clear from Sector 7. At 1500 hours, silence. Thompson and I found his equipment scattered in Chamber 12. Radio, thermal scanner, notebook, all dropped like he'd simply vanished mid-step. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of where he'd gone. The chamber had only one entrance, and we'd been monitoring all movement through the pyramid's main corridors. "People don't just disappear," Thompson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We searched for 18 hours straight. Every chamber, every corridor, every alcove large enough to hide a body. The pyramid wasn't that big. We'd mapped most of it. Walsh had to be somewhere. He wasn't." 2 days later, Hayes vanished from his guard post outside the door chamber. I'd stationed him there specifically because it was the most secure location in the pyramid. Single entrance, clear sight lines, constant radio contact with the command post. Rodriguez found Hayes's rifle propped against the wall, safety on, full magazine. His personal effects were arranged neatly beside it: wallet, watch, a photo of his girlfriend, like he'd decided to take a walk and never came back. "This is impossible," Rodriguez said, staring at the abandoned equipment. "I was here 20 minutes ago. Hayes was right here, told me everything was quiet. I implemented the buddy system immediately. No one went anywhere alone, not even to the latrine. Check-ins every 15 minutes instead of 30. Armed guards at all major intersections. I turned our archaeological expedition into a military lockdown. But the precautions felt hollow. How do you guard against something that can make people disappear from secured positions without leaving a trace? How do you fight an enemy you can't see, can't track, can't even prove exists?" The remaining team members started looking at each other differently. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. I caught Thompson and Rodriguez whispering in corners, their voices cutting off when they noticed me watching. The pyramid had taken 2 of my soldiers, and I had no idea how or why. The door remained sealed, its symbols mocking our efforts to understand them. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice I didn't want to acknowledge was starting to wonder if the real threat wasn't something outside the pyramid. It was something inside it. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut as I stood in the door chamber, staring at Hayes's abandoned rifle. 2 soldiers don't just vanish from a contained environment. Not without help. Not without someone who knew the pyramid better than we did. I gathered the remaining team in the main chamber: Thompson, Connell, Rodriguez, and 3 others whose names I'd started memorizing like a prayer. 7 men left out of 24. The math was getting ugly. "We're changing protocols again," I announced. "No one goes below level 3 without my direct authorization. All teams stay within visual contact of each other, and I want a full accounting of everyone's whereabouts for the past 72 hours. "Sir," Rodriguez spoke up, his voice tight, "are you suggesting one of us is involved in—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. 2 soldiers have disappeared from secure positions. Either this pyramid has capabilities we don't understand, or someone's been moving through it without our knowledge." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I watched their faces, looking for tells, for guilt, for anything that might give me a clue. Thompson met my eyes steadily. 15 years of partnership there, trust built in foxholes and firefights. Connell stared at the floor, jaw working like he was chewing over something unpleasant. Rodriguez kept glancing toward the corridor that led to the door chamber. "What about the door?" Connell asked suddenly. "Maybe Walsh and Hayes found a way to open it. Maybe they went through and got trapped on the other side." "The door hasn't moved," Thompson said. "We've been monitoring it constantly." "Have we?" Connell's green eyes were sharp, focused. "Really monitoring it? Or just checking on it between other duties?" He had a point. We'd been treating the door like a puzzle to solve, not a potential escape route. I'd assigned teams to study it, but no one had been watching it around the clock. "Rodriguez, I want continuous surveillance on that door. 2-man teams, 4-hour shifts. If so much as a symbol twitches, I want to know about it." Over the next week, the surveillance revealed nothing. The door remained sealed, its symbols shifting in their slow, hypnotic patterns, but never opening. The thermal signatures Hayes had detected continued to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat made of heat. But the atmosphere in our camp grew more poisonous by the day. Accusations flew in whispered conversations. Rodriguez started avoiding Connell, claiming the Irishman gave him the creeps. One of the other soldiers, Private Martinez, accused Thompson of knowing more than he was letting on about the missing men. "This is exactly what it wants," Thompson said to me privately on day 6 after Hayes's disappearance. We were in my quarters, voices low. "Whatever's in this place, it's turning us against each other." "What's in this place is us," I replied. 7 soldiers and a lot of stress. "Jim." Thompson used my first name, something he rarely did on duty. "I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you handle impossible situations. But this He gestured toward the pyramid walls. This isn't natural. The way the symbols move, the way people just vanish, the way everyone's starting to act paranoid and suspicious. It's like the place is alive. I wanted to dismiss his concerns, to chalk them up to the same stress affecting everyone else, but I'd been having the dreams too. Dreams of walking through corridors that didn't match our maps, of finding rooms full of artifacts that rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Dreams of voices speaking in languages that predated human speech. Even if you're right, I said, what do you want me to do? Abandon the mission? Leave Walsh and Hayes behind? They're already gone, Jim. Whatever happened to them, we're not going to find them by staying here and letting this place pick us off one by one. But I couldn't abandon the mission, not with so many questions unanswered, not with that door still sealed and mocking our efforts. Command expected results, and I'd built my career on delivering them. The next morning, I found Rodriguez standing in front of the door, alone. "Where's your partner?" I demanded. He turned slowly, and for a moment I didn't recognize the expression on his face. His eyes were too bright, too focused, like he was seeing something I couldn't. "Martinez is checking the perimeter," he said. "I wanted to study the patterns without distraction." "The buddy system isn't optional, Rodriguez." "Of course, sir. My apologies." But he didn't move away from the door. "Colonel, have you noticed how the symbols seem to respond to individual attention? When I focus on specific patterns, they become clearer, more defined." I looked at the door. The symbols were shifting as always, but Rodriguez was right. The ones he was staring at seemed more solid, more present than the others. "Step away from the door, specialist." "Sir, I think I'm close to understanding the sequence. If I could just have a few more minutes." "That's an order, Rodriguez." He stepped back reluctantly, but I caught him glancing over his shoulder at the door as we walked away. That look in his eyes, the same intensity I'd been seeing in Connell lately, the same distant focus that had preceded Walsh's disappearance. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the camp seemed amplified, the hum of our generators, the whisper of recycled air through the ventilation system, the soft footsteps of whoever was on watch duty. I checked my watch. 02:30 hours. Thompson's shift. I pulled on my boots and jacket, grabbed my sidearm, and stepped outside my quarters. The main chamber was empty, except for the duty officer at the communications station. I could see the glow from the door chamber down the corridor, where Rodriguez and Martinez were supposed to be maintaining surveillance. I walked toward the light, my footsteps echoing off the metal walls. As I got closer, I could hear voices, low, urgent conversation that stopped abruptly when I rounded the corner. Rodriguez was alone in the chamber, standing directly in front of the door. No sign of Martinez anywhere. "Where's your partner, specialist?" Rodriguez turned, and that strange brightness in his eyes was stronger now, almost feverish. "He went to get coffee, sir. Said he'd be right back." I keyed my radio. "Martinez, report your position." Static. "Martinez, respond immediately." Nothing. I looked at Rodriguez, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Behind him, the symbols on the door seemed to pulse faster, their thermal signatures flaring brighter in my peripheral vision. The radio crackled to life at 0600 hours, cutting through the morning routine like a blade. "Base, this is Team 7. We have a problem." I grabbed the handset, already knowing what I'd hear. "Go ahead, Team 7. "Rodriguez is gone, sir." The voice belonged to Corporal Hayes, and I could hear the strain in it even through the static. He was right here beside me, checking the thermal readings in Chamber 15. I turned to mark coordinates on my map. Couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. And when I looked back, he wasn't there. My jaw tightened. That made 5 now. 5 good soldiers who'd simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind equipment, personal effects, and increasingly panicked teammates. "Did you hear anything? See anything?" "Nothing, sir." The thermal scanner was still running. His notebook was open to the page he'd been writing on. Pen was still in his hand position on the ground. It's like he just stopped existing. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of command decisions pressing down. Maintain your position. I'm sending backup. But even as I said it, I knew backup wouldn't help. Nothing helped anymore. We'd implemented every security protocol I could think of. Buddy system, 15-minute check-ins, armed escorts, restricted access zones. None of it mattered. The pyramid took who it wanted, when it wanted. The command tent felt smaller each day, the walls pressing in as my team dwindled. 24 soldiers had started this mission. 19 remained, and the math was getting uglier by the hour. "Sir?" Hayes' voice came through again, smaller now. "What do I do with his gear?" "Leave everything exactly where it is. Mark the location and get back to base camp. Now." I set down the handset and stared at the duty roster pinned to the tent wall. Rodriguez's name stared back at me, written in his own neat handwriting from when he'd volunteered for the morning shift. Specialist Mark Rodriguez, 24 years old, from San Antonio. He'd shown me pictures of his girlfriend just last week talking about the ring he was planning to buy when we got back stateside. The tent flap rustled, and Thompson stepped inside. His face had aged 10 years in the past month, deep lines carved around his eyes that hadn't been there when we'd landed. "Heard the radio chatter. Rodriguez?" "Gone." I pulled Rodriguez's name tag from the duty board and dropped it into the growing pile in my desk drawer. 5 tags now, each one representing a conversation I'd have to have with grieving families when this was over. If this was ever over. Thompson sat heavily in the folding chair across from my desk. "Jim, we need to talk about what's happening here. What's happening is we're losing soldiers to an unknown threat in a hostile environment. I'm working on solutions." "Are you?" Thompson leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just watching our people disappear one by one while you shuffle papers and update duty rosters." The accusation hit harder than it should have. Maybe because part of me wondered if he was right. "I've implemented every security measure I can think of. Buddy system, check-ins, restricted access. And it's not working." Thompson's interruption was sharp, cutting. 5 men, Jim. 5. And not one trace of what happened to them. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication they even tried to run. They're just gone. I stood up, pacing to the far side of the tent. The walls were covered with maps, duty rosters, equipment inventories, all the normal detritus of military command. But nothing normal about this situation. Nothing in my 20 years of service had prepared me for soldiers simply vanishing into thin air. "What are you suggesting, Thompson?" "I'm suggesting this place is doing something to us. To our minds. Look around. Really look." Hayes checks his watch every 30 seconds like he's afraid time is running out. Walsh jumps at shadows that aren't there. Rodriguez was talking to himself yesterday, having full conversations with someone who wasn't in the room. I turned back to face him. Stress reactions, isolation, artificial lighting, recycled air. Bullshit. Thompson stood up, his chair scraping against the tent floor. "You know it's more than that. You've felt it too, haven't you? The way the symbols seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. The way the corridors feel different each time you walk through them, like the layout is shifting." My hands clenched into fists. Because he was right, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. I had felt it. The creeping sensation that the pyramid was alive somehow, watching us, learning from us. The way my dreams had started featuring corridors I'd never seen. Symbols that spelled out messages I couldn't quite remember when I woke up. "Even if that's true," I said carefully, "what do you want me to do about it? We have orders. We have a mission. We have dead soldiers." Thompson's voice rose, then dropped back to a whisper, as he remembered how sound carried in the thin air. "And more dying every day. How many more before you admit this place is killing them?" Before I could answer, voices erupted outside the tent. angry, overlapping, getting louder by the second. I pushed through the tent flap with Thompson right behind me. Half my remaining team stood in a rough circle near the equipment storage, voices raised in accusation and denial. At the center of it, Connell stood with his arms crossed, that same calm expression he'd worn since the first day. Too calm, considering Rodriguez had just vanished from his sector. Always volunteering for the solo assignments, Walsh was saying, his young face flushed with anger and fear. Always the first to go into new areas, always the last to come back. "I follow orders," Connell replied, his Irish accent making the words sound almost musical. "Same as everyone else." "Do you?" Hayes stepped closer, his hand resting on his sidearm, because it's funny how people only disappear when you're around. Funny how you never seem bothered by any of this. The circle tightened, and I could see the situation spiraling toward violence. These were good soldiers, trained professionals, but fear and isolation were turning them into something else, something dangerous. "Stand down, all of you." My command voice cut through the argument, and the circle reluctantly opened. "Back to your duties. Now." "Sir," Walsh said, not moving. "With respect, we have a right to know what's happening to our people. And we have a right to know why Sergeant Connell seems to be the only one who's not affected by whatever's going on here." Connell's green eyes found mine, and for just a moment I saw something flicker there. Amusement, satisfaction. It was gone too quickly to be sure. "I'm affected," Connell said quietly. "I'm just better at controlling it." "Controlling what?" Hayes demanded. "The fear, the paranoia, the way this place gets into your head and makes you see threats where there aren't any." Connell's gaze swept the circle of soldiers. "Makes you turn on your own teammates instead of focusing on the real problem." "And what's the real problem?" Walsh's voice was shaking now, barely controlled. Connell smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "The pyramid doesn't want us here, and it's going to keep taking people until we leave." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind howling across the ice above us. I could see the fear in my soldiers' faces, the way they looked at each other with suspicion and mistrust. Unit cohesion was disintegrating before my eyes. "Enough." I stepped into the center of the circle. "Connell, you're with me. The rest of you return to your assigned duties. Anyone who can't follow orders can spend the night in the brig tent." The group dispersed reluctantly, casting dark looks at Connell as they walked away. I waited until they were out of earshot before turning to face him. "Want to explain what that was about?" Connell shrugged. "Scared men looking for someone to blame. Tale as old as time, Colonel." "And you're not scared." "Of course I'm scared, but I'm not letting it turn me into an animal." He glanced toward the pyramid entrance, barely visible through the blowing snow. "That place down there, it feeds on fear, on discord. The more we turn on each other, the stronger it gets." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. But Connell had always been hard to read, even before this mission. Professional, competent, reliable. Maybe that's what was bothering the others. In a situation where everyone else was falling apart, he remained steady. "You really think the pyramid is causing this?" "I think we're dealing with something beyond our understanding. Something that doesn't follow the rules we're used to." Connell met my eyes directly. "And I think it's going to keep taking our people until we give it what it wants." "Which is?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." That night, I lay in my sleeping bag staring at the tent ceiling, listening to the wind and the occasional murmur of voices from the guard posts. Thompson's words echoed in my head, mixing with Connell's calm certainty and the fear I'd seen in my soldiers' eyes. 5 men gone, 19 left. And somewhere beneath 30 meters of ice, a pyramid full of secrets waited in the dark. The radio beside my cot crackled softly, routine check-in from the night watch. "Base, this is Guard Post 2. All quiet. Copy. Guard post 2. But it wasn't all quiet. It was never all quiet anymore. Even when the voices stopped and the equipment powered down, there was something else. A presence that seemed to press against the edges of consciousness, patient and watchful and hungry. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new disappearances, new accusations, new fractures in what remained of my command. The pyramid had all the time in the world. We were running out of time entirely. The accusations started before I'd even finished my morning coffee. Walsh cornered Hayes near the equipment tent, his voice carrying across the camp in the thin Antarctic air. "You were supposed to be watching Rodriguez's back," Walsh said, jabbing a finger at Hayes's chest. "How does someone just vanish when you're standing right there?" Hayes stepped back, hands raised. "I told you what happened. I turned around for 30 seconds. Bullshit." Walsh's face was red. Whether from cold or anger, I couldn't tell. 30 seconds and poof, he's gone? That's not how people disappear. I set down my coffee and walked over. The rest of the team was gathering, drawn by the raised voices. In the harsh morning light, they all looked like hell. Hollow eyes, stubble, that twitchy alertness that comes from too little sleep and too much fear. "What's the problem here?" I asked. Walsh spun toward me. "The problem is we're dropping like flies and nobody wants to admit what's really happening." "Which is?" "Someone's picking us off." Walsh's eyes swept the group. "And I've got a pretty good idea who." The silence stretched out. Wind whistled through the guy lines of our tents, the only sound in the white emptiness around us. Then Connell stepped forward from the back of the group. "Go ahead," he said, his Irish accent thicker than usual. "Say what you're thinking." Walsh didn't hesitate. You're always volunteering for the dangerous assignments, always first into new areas, last to come back. And funny thing, people only disappear when you're around. "That's enough," I started, but Hayes cut me off. "He's right, Colonel. Think about it. Rodriguez vanished while I was mapping, but Connell was supposed to be in that sector too." "Where were you, Connell?" Connell's green eyes went cold. "Following orders, same as you." "Walsh disappeared during perimeter patrol," Hayes continued, gaining momentum. "Connell was on duty that shift. Hayes vanished from guard post. Connell had just rotated off that position." More voices joined in. The accusations flew fast and ugly, months of tension finally boiling over. I watched Connell's face throughout it all. He stood perfectly still, letting the storm rage around him. No denials, no anger, just that calculating look I'd noticed more and more lately. "You done?" Connell asked when the shouting died down. "Prove us wrong," Walsh said. "Tell us where you were when Rodriguez disappeared." "Sector 12, checking thermal readings. Alone, as ordered." Connell's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "Same as I've been doing for weeks while you lot jump at shadows." "Convenient," Hayes muttered. Connell turned those pale green eyes on him. "What's convenient is having someone to blame. Makes it easier than admitting the truth. Which is, this place doesn't want us here." Connell gestured toward the pyramid entrance, barely visible through the blowing snow. "It's been trying to tell us that from day one. The symbols, the dreams, the way the corridors feel different each time you walk through them. But you're all too scared to listen." The group went quiet. I could see it in their faces, the recognition, the fear. Because Connell was right about one thing. We'd all felt it. The wrongness that seemed to seep out of the pyramid like cold air. "So what are you saying?" I asked. Connell shrugged. "I'm saying maybe the pyramid's just taking what it wants, and maybe it'll keep taking until we're smart enough to leave." "That's insane," Walsh said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Connell's smile was thin and cold. "More insane than thinking I could make 5 grown soldiers disappear without a trace, without blood, without struggle, without anyone seeing anything?" He had a point. The logistics alone were impossible. But the alternative, that something in the pyramid was hunting us, was worse. "Enough," I said. "Everyone back to your assigned duties. We'll discuss this later." The group dispersed slowly, casting suspicious glances at Connell. He watched them go with that same calculating expression, then turned to me. "You don't believe them," he said. It wasn't a question. I don't know what to believe anymore. Smart answer. Connell shouldered his pack. "Where do you want me today, Colonel?" I studied his face, looking for something. Guilt, fear, madness. But all I saw was the same competent soldier who'd been following orders for 3 weeks. "Stay close to base camp," I said finally. "Help Thompson with equipment maintenance." Connell nodded and walked away. I watched him go, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. The rest of the day passed in tense quiet. The team worked in pairs, nobody trusting anyone else to be alone. I tried to focus on routine tasks, checking supplies, reviewing maps, updating reports, but my mind kept circling back to the accusations, to Connell's calm denials, to the growing certainty that we were missing something important. Thompson found me in the command tent around 1500 hours, going over duty rosters for the 100th time. "We need to talk," he said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "About Connell?" "About all of it." Thompson sat down across from me, his weathered face grim. "Jim, I've been thinking about what Walsh said. The timing, the patterns. What if he's right? You think Connell's killing our people?" "I think someone is." Thompson leaned forward. 5 men don't just vanish into thin air, not without help. I set down my pen. "You've known Connell for years. You really think he's capable of this?" 3 weeks ago? No. But 3 weeks ago, none of us were capable of a lot of things. Thompson rubbed his eyes. "This place changes people, Jim. You felt it. The way it gets inside your head. Makes you think things, see things." "So you're saying the pyramid made him do it?" "I'm saying maybe it found the right person to work through." Thompson's voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone who could get close to the others. Someone they'd trust." Before I could respond, shouts erupted from outside. We rushed out to find the team gathered around the equipment area again, but this time, the mood was different, panicked instead of angry. "Thompson's gone," Hayes said as soon as he saw us. "He was supposed to be on watch at the pyramid entrance. When I went to relieve him, his post was empty." My blood went cold. "When did you last see him?" 1400 hours. He was setting up for his shift, checking his gear. Hayes' hands shook as he spoke. "I found his rifle propped against the entrance marker. Safety on, full magazine. His radio was on the ground next to it, still tuned to our frequency. Any signs of struggle? Nothing. It's like he just left everything and walked away." I looked around the group, counting faces. 12 men left out of 24. Thompson, my oldest friend, the one person I'd trusted completely, was gone. "Search teams," I ordered. 2-man groups, 15-minute check-ins, cover every mapped section of the pyramid. "What about Connell?" Walsh asked. The accusation in his voice was unmistakable. I found Connell in the crowd, standing slightly apart from the others. His expression was unreadable. "Connell was with me all afternoon," I said, "helping with equipment maintenance." It was a lie. Connell had been in and out of the command tent, running various errands. There'd been plenty of time for him to slip away, but I couldn't bring myself to voice the suspicion that was growing in my mind. The search took 6 hours. We combed through every chamber, every corridor, every alcove we'd mapped. Nothing. Thompson had vanished as completely as the others, leaving behind only his equipment and a growing sense of dread. That night, I sat alone in Thompson's quarters, going through his personal effects, standard military gear, a few photos from home, some paperback novels. Nothing unusual until I found his journal, tucked under his sleeping bag. Most of the entries were routine. duty logs, weather observations, equipment notes. But the final entry, dated yesterday, made my hands shake as I read it. The influence is getting stronger. I can feel it in my dreams now, showing me things that haven't happened yet. Or maybe they have, and I just don't remember. The symbols move when nobody's watching. I've seen them. The corridors change too, leading to places that weren't there before. Someone's given into it completely. I can see it in their eyes. That bright, feverish look like they're listening to something the rest of us can't hear. They're not fighting it anymore. They're helping it. Jim needs to seal this place and get us out before it's too late. The pyramid doesn't just want to be found. It wants to be fed. And it's found the perfect way to do it. If something happens to me, check the sealed chamber behind the door. The answers are there. But be careful who you trust. The pyramid has already chosen its servant. I read the entry 3 times, my mind racing. Thompson had figured something out, something that got him killed. And now he was gone, just like the others. I folded the journal and slipped it into my jacket. Outside, I could hear the team settling in for another sleepless night. Whispered conversations, the rustle of sleeping bags, the constant wind that never seemed to stop. Tomorrow I'd have to tell them about Thompson's note. I'd have to admit that one of us, maybe one of the men I was responsible for, was a killer. The thought made me sick, but first, I had to figure out who I could trust. Because if Thompson was right, the pyramid had already chosen its servant, and that servant was still among us, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. I checked my sidearm and settled back against Thompson's pillow, staring at the tent ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. Maybe it never would again. I needed to get control back. 6 men dead, and the team was falling apart. Walsh and Hayes were ready to tear each other's throats out, and everyone was looking at me like I had answers I didn't have. But maybe I did have answers. They were just locked behind that damn door. I'd been avoiding it, letting the teams document and analyze while I dealt with the disappearances. But the door was the key. It had to be. Everything else in this pyramid was just stuff. Artifacts, symbols, empty chambers. The door was the only thing that was actively doing something, the only thing that seemed alive. I gathered what was left of my gear and headed down to level 3. The corridors felt different now, not just because half my team was gone, but because the pyramid itself seemed to be watching. The symbols on the walls definitely moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd stopped pretending otherwise. The door chamber was empty when I arrived. Good. I needed to work without Hayes checking his watch every 30 seconds or Walsh jumping at shadows. I set up my equipment, thermal scanner, notebook camera, measuring tools, and really looked at the door for the first time in weeks. 4 meters across, perfectly circular, embedded in what should have been solid wall. 7 concentric rings of symbols, each ring rotating independently at speeds so slow you couldn't see the movement, only notice that things had changed when you looked away and back. The symbols themselves shifted and flowed like they were made of liquid metal. But when I touched them, they felt solid and warm. I started with the artifacts. We'd cataloged over 200 objects from the upper chambers, and Rodriguez had been right. Some of the symbols matched. I spread out photographs of every artifact we'd found, looking for patterns. The coffee can-sized cylinder Connell had examined on our first day. 3 symbols on its base matched symbols in the door's outermost ring. A cube from Chamber 8 had markings that corresponded to the 3rd ring. A twisted metal sculpture from Level 2 showed the same flowing patterns as the door's innermost circle. I worked for 6 hours straight, mapping correspondences, my notebook filled with sketches and cross-references. The thermal scanner showed those same 3 symbols in the innermost ring still glowing faintly, 0.3 degrees above ambient temperature. By the time I stopped for food, I had a theory. The artifacts weren't just random objects, they were instruction manuals. Each one showed how specific symbols should be positioned relative to others. The pyramid's builders had scattered the combination across dozens of chambers, forcing anyone who wanted to open the door to explore the entire structure first. I came back the next morning with a different approach. Instead of trying to force the rings to move, I studied how they moved naturally. Each ring had its own rhythm, its own pattern of rotation. The outermost ring completed a full rotation every 4 hours. The second ring moved faster, about 2 hours per rotation. The inner rings moved progressively faster, with the innermost ring spinning once every 20 minutes. But they weren't random. When I watched long enough, I could see moments when symbols aligned across multiple rings, creating brief combinations that matched the artifact patterns. The door wasn't locked. It was waiting for the right moment. I spent 3 days learning the timing. The thermal scanner helped, showing me when the heated symbols were approaching alignment with their corresponding rings. I started to see the pattern. 7 specific symbols needed to align simultaneously across all 7 rings, creating a combination that would only occur once every 18 hours and 43 minutes. The next alignment was scheduled for 14:27 hours. I positioned myself in front of the door at 14:20, watching the rings slowly rotate toward convergence. The symbols grew brighter as they approached their target positions. The entire door began to emit a low humming sound, so quiet I felt it more than heard it. 14:26. The outermost ring's target symbol was 3 degrees from alignment. The second ring was almost perfect. The inner rings spun faster, their symbols blurring slightly as they approached the critical moment. 14:27. 7 symbols clicked into perfect alignment with an audible snap that echoed through the chamber. The door's surface flashed once, brilliant white light that left spots in my vision. When my eyes cleared, the door was gone. Not opened. Gone. The circular opening showed a chamber beyond, but the door itself had simply vanished, leaving no trace it had ever existed. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped through. The chamber beyond was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 10 meters across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my light beam. But it wasn't empty. Bodies, 7 of them, arranged in a rough circle on the floor. I recognized Thompson immediately. His graying hair, his broad shoulders, the scar on his left hand from a training accident 5 years ago. He was lying on his back, arms at his sides, eyes closed, like he was sleeping. Except for the dark stain across his chest where something sharp had punched through his jacket. Walsh was next to him, curled on his side. A massive dent in the back of his skull, like someone had hit him with a rock. Hayes lay face down, 3 parallel gashes across his back that had soaked through his shirt. Rodriguez. Martinez. The 2 soldiers whose names I'd never learned well enough to remember. All of them showing signs of violence. Stab wounds, blunt force trauma, defensive cuts on their hands where they'd tried to protect themselves. But they weren't decomposing. No smell of death, no bloating or discoloration. They looked like they died minutes ago, not days or weeks. The chamber was preserving them somehow, keeping them exactly as they'd been when they died. I knelt beside Thompson, checking for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. His skin was cool, but not cold. His muscles still flexible. Whatever had killed him, it had been quick and brutal. The wound in his chest was precise, angled upward toward the heart. Professional. I stood up slowly, my flashlight beam sweeping across the other bodies. All of them showed the same thing. Violence, but controlled violence. Someone who knew how to kill efficiently and quietly. Someone who could overpower trained soldiers without giving them a chance to fight back or call for help. Someone they trusted enough to get close. The chamber walls were covered in the same flowing symbols as the rest of the pyramid, but these were different. Darker, more aggressive. They seemed to writhe in my flashlight beam, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of the far wall, carved deep into the stone, was a message in English. They saw too much. They had to be stopped. Below it, scratched in smaller letters, "You're next." I knelt beside Thompson's body, my hands shaking as I checked for a pulse one more time. Nothing. The wound in his chest was precise, angled upward toward his heart. Professional, deliberate. Footsteps echoed behind me in the chamber. I spun around, my hand instinctively reaching for my sidearm. Connell stood in the circular doorway, his lean frame silhouetted against the corridor's dim light. His green eyes swept across the 7 bodies arranged around the chamber, and his expression didn't change. No shock, no horror, nothing. "You found them," he said quietly, his Irish accent more pronounced than usual. "Connell." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. "How did you get in here? The door, I've been watching you work on it for days." He stepped into the chamber, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. "Timing the rotations, learning the patterns. You're not the only one who can read the symbols." The way he moved was different, controlled, predatory. Like he belonged here. "You knew about this place?" It wasn't a question. Connell nodded slowly, his gaze moving from body to body. "I knew what you'd find eventually. What you had to find. Did you—" I couldn't finish the question, but I didn't need to. "Kill them?" Connell's thin mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Yes." The word hit me like a physical blow. 6 weeks of searching, of wondering, of watching my team disappear one by one. And here was the answer, standing 3 meters away with blood on his hands. "Why?" My voice came out as a whisper. Connell stepped closer, and I could see his eyes clearly now. They were bright, feverish, but completely lucid. "The pyramid showed me things, Colonel. Visions. What happens when the outside world learns about this place? What they'll do with what's down here." He gestured at the walls, at the symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light. "This isn't just some archaeological find. It's a weapon, a tool, something that can reshape reality itself, and humanity." He shook his head. "We're not ready for it. We'll never be ready for it." "So you decided to play God?" Anger was replacing the shock now, hot and sharp in my chest. "I decided to protect our species." Connell's voice remained calm, matter of fact. "The pyramid made me understand. It chose me to be its guardian, to keep its secrets safe. By murdering your own team? By eliminating witnesses?" He reached behind his back and pulled out a combat knife, the blade catching the strange light from the walls. Thompson figured it out first. Started asking too many questions. The others would have followed eventually. I backed away, my hand closing around the ice pick on my equipment belt. "And now you're going to kill me too?" "You and the 4 men waiting back at camp." Connell advanced slowly, the knife held low and ready. "Then I'll seal the entrance and stay here. The pyramid wants a guardian, and I'm willing to serve." "You're insane." "Am I?" He tilted his head, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. "Look around you, Colonel. 7 men dead for weeks, but their bodies haven't decomposed. The symbols that move when you're not watching. The corridors that change layout between visits. This place operates by rules we don't understand, and it's been teaching me those rules." He was close enough now that I could see the dried blood under his fingernails. Thompson's blood, Walsh's, all of them. "The pyramid doesn't want to be found," Connell continued. "It's been waiting down here for thousands of years, and it's not ready to be disturbed. I'm just helping it maintain its privacy." I pulled the ice pick free, the metal cold against my palm. "I won't let you hurt anyone else." Connell's smile widened. "You don't have a choice." He lunged forward, the knife aimed at my chest. I threw myself sideways, crashing into the chamber wall as the blade whistled past my ribs. The symbols under my hand flared bright blue, and for a split second I felt something vast and alien brush against my mind. Connell spun and came at me again, this time slashing upward. The knife caught me across the shoulder, slicing through my jacket and into muscle. Pain exploded down my arm, but I managed to swing the ice pick in a wild arc. The point scraped across his ribs, drawing blood but not stopping him. He grabbed my wrist with his free hand, his grip like iron, and drove his knee into my stomach. Air rushed out of my lungs and I doubled over, gasping. "The pyramid chose well," Connell said, raising the knife above his head. "You've been a good soldier, Colonel. But this is where your service ends." I threw my weight forward, driving my shoulder into his midsection. We crashed to the floor together, rolling between the bodies of my dead men. Connell's knife hand was pinned under my weight, but he managed to work it free and slash at my face. I jerked my head back, feeling the blade part the air inches from my nose, and brought the ice pick down hard. Connell twisted at the last second, and the point buried itself in the metal floor, sending vibrations up my arm. He rolled away and came up in a crouch, blood seeping from the cut on his ribs. "You're only making this harder on yourself." "Good." I yanked the ice pick free and circled away from him, keeping Thompson's body between us. I want it to be hard. Connell feinted left, then came right, the knife moving in a professional pattern I recognized from combat training. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe longer, studying us, learning our weaknesses. The blade caught me across the chest, opening a line of fire from my collarbone to my sternum. Blood soaked through my shirt, warm and sticky. I stumbled backward, my vision starting to blur at the edges. "Almost over," Connell said softly. "Just let it happen, Colonel. Join your men." He came at me one final time, the knife aimed at my heart. I waited until the last possible second, then stepped aside and drove the ice pick forward with everything I had left. The point took him in the neck, just below his jaw. His eyes went wide with surprise and the knife tumbled from his fingers. Blood poured down his chest, dark and thick in the chamber's strange light. Connell tried to speak, but only a wet gurgling sound came out. He reached up toward the ice pick, his fingers trembling. Then his knees buckled and he collapsed beside Rodriguez's body. I stood over him, swaying on my feet, watching the light fade from his green eyes. The chamber seemed to pulse around us, the symbols on the walls growing brighter and more agitated. My shoulder and chest were on fire, and I could feel blood running down my arms. The ice pick protruded from Connell's neck at an odd angle, its handle slick with blood. His face had gone pale, but there was something almost peaceful in his expression, like he'd finally found what he was looking for. My legs gave out and I dropped to my knees beside Thompson's body. The chamber spun around me, the symbols blurring into streams of light. I tried to reach for my radio, but my arms wouldn't obey. Blood loss was dragging me down into darkness. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Connell's body, lying motionless among the others. 8 soldiers now arranged in their eternal circle in the heart of the pyramid. I came to slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark pool. My head felt like someone had been using it for batting practice, and every breath sent sharp pain through my chest and shoulder. The taste of copper filled my mouth. "Easy, sir. Don't try to move yet." The voice belonged to Hayes. I forced my eyes open and found myself staring up at the domed ceiling of the chamber, but something was different. Portable lights had been set up around the perimeter, casting harsh white light across the metal walls. The symbols weren't glowing anymore. They'd gone back to their normal, dark state. How long was I out? My voice came out as a croak. "About 6 hours." Hayes knelt beside me, checking the bandages wrapped around my shoulder and chest. "Rodriguez found you when you missed your 1800 check-in. Took us another hour to figure out how to get the door open again." I tried to sit up, but Hayes pressed a hand against my good shoulder. "Sir, you lost a lot of blood. We need to keep you still until the medics arrive." Medics? I looked around the chamber. The bodies were still there. Thompson, Walsh, the others, but they'd been covered with emergency blankets. Connell lay where he'd fallen, the ice pick still protruding from his neck. "How did you—" "Emergency beacons, sir." Rodriguez appeared in my field of vision, holding a radio. "Soon as we found you and saw what happened in here, we activated every beacon we had. Command sending a full rescue team." I managed to prop myself up on my elbow despite Hayes's protests. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through my wounds, but I needed to see what they'd done. "The entrance sealed it up tight," Hayes said. "Used the excavator to push ice and snow back over the whole thing. From the surface, you can't tell we were ever here." Rodriguez nodded toward the covered bodies. "We documented everything first. Photos, measurements, the whole scene. But command was real clear. This stays buried." The radio in Rodriguez's hand crackled to life. "Base camp, this is Rescue 1. ETA 15 minutes. Prepare for immediate dust-off." "Copy, Rescue 1," Rodriguez responded. "1 critical, 3 walking wounded. LZ is marked and clear." Hayes helped me sit up properly, supporting my back against the chamber wall. The movement made my head spin, but I could think more clearly now. "The others?" "Martinez and Stevens are topside, making sure the site looks clean," Hayes said. "We're the only ones who know what really happened down here." I looked at Connell's body under the emergency blanket. Even covered, I could see the outline of the ice pick. "What did you tell command about the casualties?" "Equipment failure," Rodriguez said without hesitation. "Cave-in during excavation. Happens all the time in unstable ice formations." The sound of helicopter rotors began echoing down through the pyramid's corridors. Hayes and Rodriguez exchanged glances. "Sir," Hayes said carefully, "what do we say about Connell?" I stared at the covered form of my sergeant. The man who'd killed 7 of my soldiers. The man who tried to kill me. The man who'd claimed the pyramid had chosen him as its guardian. "Same story," I said finally. "Equipment failure. He was trying to help with the rescue when the ice shifted." Rodriguez keyed his radio. "Rescue 1. We're bringing the critical up now. Be advised, we have multiple KIA from structural collapse during excavation." "Copy that, base camp. Medical team standing by." Hayes and Rodriguez helped me to my feet. My legs felt like rubber, but I could walk with support. As we moved toward the circular opening, I took one last look at the chamber. The symbols on the walls were completely dark now, just carved metal reflecting our portable lights. Whatever power had been in this place, whatever had driven Connell to madness, it felt dormant now. But not gone. Never gone. The helicopter was waiting on the surface when we emerged from the pyramid. The medics took over immediately, strapping me to a stretcher and starting an IV before I could protest. As they loaded me into the aircraft, I caught a glimpse of the excavation site. Hayes had been right. You couldn't tell we'd ever been here, just unmarked ice stretching to the horizon. The flight to McMurdo Station passed in a blur of medical checks and radio chatter. The medics worked on my wounds while the pilot coordinated with command. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the helicopter's vibrations mixing with the pain medication they'd given me. At McMurdo, they transferred me to a larger aircraft, a C-130 configured for medical transport. The flight to Christchurch, New Zealand took 8 hours. I was conscious for most of it, staring out the small window at the endless expanse of ice below. Somewhere down there, the pyramid waited in its frozen tomb. From Christchurch, they flew me to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of surgeries, physical therapy, and medications. The shoulder wound had been deep but clean. The knife had missed major arteries and nerves. The chest wound was more serious, requiring surgery to repair damaged muscle tissue. But I was alive, and according to the doctors, I'd make a full recovery. The debriefing started while I was still in the hospital bed. Major General Harrison arrived on my 4th day at Walter Reed. He was a thin man with gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that came from spending too much time in Pentagon conference rooms. He pulled up a chair beside my bed and opened a thick folder. Colonel Mitchell, he said without preamble, I need you to walk me through everything that happened in Antarctica. I told him the official story. Communications equipment installation. Structural collapse during excavation. Equipment failure that killed 8 good soldiers. I stuck to the script Rodriguez and Hayes had established. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in his folder. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Colonel, I've read the preliminary reports from your surviving team members. Their accounts are remarkably consistent. Good soldiers, sir. They know how to file accurate reports. Indeed. Harrison closed the folder. The thing is, Colonel, we've had teams monitoring that site for the past 72 hours. Satellite surveillance, ground-penetrating radar, the works. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Sir? There's nothing there, Colonel. No excavation site, no equipment, no bodies. Just virgin ice as far as our instruments can detect. I stared at him. That's impossible, sir. We were there for weeks. I'm sure you were. Harrison stood up, tucking the folder under his arm. The question is, where exactly were you? He left without another word, and I didn't see him again for 3 days. The next debriefer was a woman from an agency that didn't officially exist. She never gave me her name, just showed me credentials that looked legitimate and asked the same questions Harrison had asked. Then she asked different questions. Tell me about the dreams, Colonel. What dreams? The medical staff reports you've been talking in your sleep, describing corridors, symbols, chambers, very specific architectural details. I'd been having the dreams since the first night at Walter Reed. Always the same, walking through the pyramid's corridors, but they were different now, longer, more complex, leading to chambers I'd never seen before. In the dreams, the symbols moved constantly, rearranging themselves into new patterns. And there were voices, speaking in languages that predated human civilization. Trauma response, I told her. The doctor said it's normal after what we went through. She made a note in her file. The symbols you describe, can you draw them? I don't remember any symbols. You described them in detail last night. The night nurse recorded everything. She showed me transcripts of things I'd apparently said while unconscious. Detailed descriptions of hieroglyphs, geometric patterns, mathematical sequences. None of it made sense to me in my waking state, but reading it brought back flashes of the dreams. Colonel, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you and your team encounter anything unusual in Antarctica? Anything that might explain the discrepancies in our satellite data? I met her eyes. Ma'am, my team and I installed communications equipment as ordered. During excavation to establish a stable foundation, we experienced a structural collapse that resulted in 8 casualties. That's what happened. She studied me for a long moment, then closed her file. Very well, Colonel. Thank you for your cooperation. The debriefings continued for 2 more weeks. Different people, same questions, same answers. By the time they released me from the hospital, I'd told the official story so many times it almost felt true. Almost. The paperwork came on my last day at Walter Reed. A stack of documents 3 inches thick, all stamped with classifications I'd never seen before. Non-disclosure agreements that covered not just what had happened in Antarctica, but any dreams, memories, or psychological effects I might experience in the future. The penalties for violation were severe enough to make me understand this wasn't a request. I signed everything. They gave me a month of medical leave and a new assignment, a desk job at the Pentagon reviewing logistics reports, safe, quiet, far from anything that might trigger unwanted memories, the kind of assignment they gave to officers who'd seen too much. The dreams didn't stop. Every night I walked through those corridors again, but they were changing, expanding, becoming something larger than what we'd found. In the dreams, I could read the symbols now. They told stories of civilizations that had risen and fallen before humans learned to make fire. They described technologies that could reshape reality itself, and they warned of guardians who would do anything to protect those secrets. Sometimes in the dreams, I found Connell waiting for me in the chamber with the door. He still had the ice pick in his neck, but he could speak. "You should have listened," he'd say. "It's not finished with us yet." I'd wake up in a cold sweat, checking the locks on my apartment door, looking out the windows for signs of surveillance. The rational part of my mind knew it was trauma, PTSD, the normal psychological aftermath of what I'd experienced. But the part of me that had touched those symbols, that had felt the pyramid's alien presence, knew better. 3 months after Antarctica, I was sitting in my Pentagon office reviewing supply manifests when Rodriguez called. "Sir, I think you should know. Hayes is dead." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "What happened?" "Car accident. Single vehicle. No witnesses. Drove straight into a bridge abutment at 60 miles per hour. "Suicide?" "That's what they're calling it. But sir, I talked to him last week. He was having the dreams too. The same ones you described in the hospital." I closed my eyes. "Rodriguez, we can't talk about this over the phone." "I know, sir, but I had to tell you. Martinez is missing too. Hasn't reported for duty in 3 days. His apartment's empty. No forwarding address." After Rodriguez hung up, I sat in my office staring at the supply manifests without seeing them. The official story was holding. As far as the world knew, we'd lost 8 soldiers to equipment failure in Antarctica. The site had been sealed, the evidence buried under tons of ice and snow. The survivors had been debriefed, medicated, and reassigned to safe positions. But something was still out there. Something that had chosen Connell as its guardian, and maybe wasn't finished choosing. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the bottle of sleeping pills the doctors had prescribed. I'd been avoiding them, afraid of what I might say in my sleep. But the dreams were getting stronger, more vivid. Sometimes I woke up with dirt under my fingernails, though I couldn't remember how it got there. That night, I took 2 pills and slept without dreaming for the first time in months. But when I woke up, there was a message written on my bathroom mirror in what looked like condensation. "The door is still open." I wiped it away and told myself it was a hallucination, a side effect of the medication. But deep down, in the part of my